I want to talk about what's been a real distraction this week. So this week we've been talking about my personal finances, and I wanted to give you a sense of how I've approached that. Really, for me, from day one, I came into office knowing that this was a really important and privileged position that I was given, Minister of Finance, and that to do that well, I had to make sure that I had no conflicts of interest. So I worked with our Ethics Commissioner. I explained to her all of my assets and those of my family. I got advice from her, and through that advice, had to consider how to move forward to make sure that I didn't have any conflicts of interest. I considered the advice and moved forward to ensure that that those conflicts weren't there. And I, perhaps naively, thought that, you know, in Canada, following the rules and respecting the recommendations of the Ethics Commissioner, respecting the recommendations of an Officer of Parliament, would be what Canadians would expect, would meet up to their high expectations. In fact, what we've seen over the last week is that I need to do more. As Minister of Finance in this role, it's important to make sure people have absolute confidence. So I wanted to let you know what I've done today. First of all, you've all received a copy of the letter that the Ethics Commissioner gave me about a year and a half ago, explaining what she thought I should do to best ensure that I didn't have conflicts of interest. So I want transparency so that you can see that she gave me some recommendations that, in her estimation, were the best way for me to avoid conflict. But I informed the Ethics Commissioner this morning that I wanted to go further. So I told her that there were 3 steps that I thought would be good steps. First of all, I told her that I would like to, even though it wasn't part of her recommendations, move forward and put my assets in a blind trust. Secondly, I said to her that what I'd like to do is work together with her office and whatever other aspect I need to think about, whether it's a trustee or some other approach, to divest all of my and my family's assets in Morneau Sheppel. So that will be my goal in working towards that outcome. And finally, I said that while that process happens, and I started it this morning, it'll take a little while, hopefully not too long, and while those assets get divested in an orderly fashion, there will remain in place a conflict of interest screen to make sure that in that process, I'm completely free of conflicts. So in my estimation, what we've seen here is that, that I need to meet up to these standards, and I plan on doing so. So now I hope I can get on with doing what I see as the really important work that I have to do for Canadians. Soon I'll be announcing the fall economic statement, very soon, in the House this afternoon, so that Canadians can see where we're going in our economy, which I'm very pleased with and happy to talk about.
Minister is asking you to withdraw the bill C-27 that you sponsored and called that a conflict. You agree that you were in conflict on that bill, and are you going to withdraw it?
No, I don't agree with that position at all. What I can say is that we have an approach to dealing with conflicts. The Ethics Commissioner has advised me, and I've gone forward with that approach. What I expect is that this issue is before the Ethics Commissioner, and she may have a point of view on this. But from my perspective, what I want to do is make sure that we move forward with policies that help Canadians, and that is one that we think will advance the cause of better pensions for Canadians.
How do you divest the shares? You have $40 million of shares in a company that your father built and you continued to build. What does it mean to you personally to unload those shares? And are you going to do it like on the stock market, or are you just going to transfer it to somebody else?
Your numbers are incorrect. I have about 1 million shares, but that's not really the relevant issue here. The point is that I've said that I think the standard that I'm going to meet up to is to divest those shares, and I'm going to work with the Ethics Commissioner, because of course I'm not in control of those shares, to make sure that that happens. And I'll do that as expeditiously as possible. And I expect, although I won't know, since it will be through somebody else, that it will be through the stock market.
And how do you feel about that? How do you feel about losing those shares for a family business? It was a family. Excuse me, can I ask a question? It's a family business. how do you feel? I just want to follow up on Glenn. How do you feel about divesting this finery business?
Well, I'll mainly talk about my feelings at home with my wife. But since you asked, I spent 25 years building a business with my family. I worked with my father across the hall. We went back and forth across the hall 50 times a day. It was a successful enterprise. And it gave me the opportunity to think about what else I could do with my life. And I decided that I could have the biggest possible impact by going into government. So my conclusion is, as much as I'm proud of what I did in the past, that what I really care about now is what I want to do in the future. And we've started down a path, I think, to make a real difference for Canadians. Now we have more work to do, and if that's what I need to do in order to get that work done, that's okay with
Do
me.
you anticipate taking a big loss, given that now you've stated publicly that you have to sell these shares? Are you going to take a big loss on that, and what does that mean to your family?
I think what's important to consider here is the overall goal. I mean, my goal is to make sure that I'm doing work on behalf of Canadians. I'm sure that I can work with the Ethics Commissioner to divest of shares in some sort of orderly fashion. I'm sure that will get done, and I won't be aware of how that happens or what the price is, and I'm okay with that, because I think what I made a commitment to do a couple of years ago was to take on a role that's a big responsibility, an important responsibility for Canadians. And, this is not unexpected in the sense that I always knew there'd be days that would be more or less difficult, and we'll move forward to do the work that we're intending to do.
Minister, what changed your mind? Because all week you were deferring to the Ethics Commissioner, you were defending that you did not have a conflict of interest. So why have you changed your mind now?
Well, I'd like to step back. We have a process in place in our country that previous finance ministers have used, that all other MPs have used. It's a process of going to the Ethics Commissioner and working with her to come up with the best approach in your individual situation. And as you can see in the letter there, she gave me what she thought was the best approach in my situation. And I took that approach. But at a certain stage, we can't have 10 ears. We work for Canadians. I'm trying to make sure that we are successfully improving the lives of Canadians across the country. So if we're getting distracted because some people are worried about my personal situation, it's time to move on. And that's what I've decided to do. Josh?
Can you clarify the next steps for us? You said you began divesting today. Does that mean you began setting up the blind trust today, or you actually began selling the shares today? And will it be the blind trust that will actually carry out the divestment?
What I did this morning was I spoke to the Ethics Commissioner to tell her my intent, that I wanted to set up a blind trust, that I wanted to move forward on ensuring that neither me nor my family had any assets in Morneau Sheppel. And I also made a point of speaking to a lawyer to begin that process. I can't tell you anything beyond that process for two reasons. First of all, it's just starting. And second of all, it will likely be out of my hands. It will be put in the place of someone else to execute on that. And I want them to execute that as expeditiously as possible, but in an orderly manner.
You said on Power and Politics that your assets are going into a blind trust. Your fellow Liberal MPs have tweeted your assets were in a blind trust. Morneau Sheppel thought your assets were in a blind trust. Why didn't you correct the public impression when you decided not to put them into a blind trust? Why did you leave that impression out there until now?
I wouldn't agree that that's actually the way that it happened. But I guess if I step back, when I decided to run for office, I remember having lunch one day a few years ago with Paul Martin and talking to him about how he arranged his affairs. And I've met with other ministers in the government, and they told me you can expect to put your affairs in a blind trust. So that was my expectation before I came into office. When I took on my role, I thought that would be the best way for me to move forward because that's what I'd heard in the past. But what I heard from Mary Dawson's office, from the Ethics Commissioner, which you can see in this letter, is that in her estimation, the blind trust wouldn't relieve me from knowing what was in the blind trust. And that, in fact, a conflict of interest screen would be a superior way for me to assure that I didn't have a conflict. So I took her advice, considered it, took it, because I think it's important not only to do what the recommendations are because she has the expertise in that area, but it's also important to respect an officer of Parliament. So finally, though, what I've decided is that I'm going to go farther, above and beyond anything that might have been recommended, because I want to make sure that this isn't the discussion that we're having tomorrow or the day after.
We are
Before you had
today.
your shares in a
Morneau,
numbered company. Before your shares were in a numbered company then, you're now going to put them in a blind trust. So how can you assure Canadians that having your shares in a numbered company wasn't some advantage to you or to Morneau Sheppel, considering everything you know as finance minister?
What's going into the blind trust?
To be clear, I put in place an approach as recommended by the ethics commissioner that's been in place for the last year and a half. So that conflict of interest screen has been in place. What I'm saying in future is that my assets, which won't include any shares of Morneau Sheppel, not for me nor for my family, will be put into a blind trust. So this is a way for me to assure Canadians to the highest level of confidence that there is no possibility of any conflicts of interest. I already knew there were no conflicts of interest, but apparently what's been in place, what we've been doing for generations, the approach that we've been taking, is now being questioned. So when something's questioned, you have to decide what's most important. And for me, what's most important is the work that I'm trying to do on behalf of Canadians. This isn't the issue that we should be talking about. Excuse me.
Stuff in the blind trust, is that?
L'opposition dira, M. Morneau, que vous agissez seulement parce que vous avez été pris la main dans le sac. Est-ce que c'est le cas?
Pas du tout. Ce que j'ai dit, je sais que j'ai suivi les règles. Je sais que j'ai respecté le commissaire d'éthique. Et c'était très important. J'ai eu aucun conflit pendant les dernières deux années. Mais je sais aussi qu'il y a une distraction en ce moment. Je sais qu'il y a une façon d'être absolument clair. De cette façon, avec mes trois choses, avec une fiducie sans égard, avec une façon d'être certain que j'ai pas ou ma famille n'a pas encore des actions en Morneau Sheppel. Et finalement, je vais continuer avec un écran jusqu'à c'est fait. De cette façon, on peut être absolument certain qu'il n'y a pas une distraction, il n'y a pas une perception, il n'y a pas une difficulté et il y a au contraire un niveau de confiance dans ma situation.
Have there been cases so far in your 2 years as finance minister where your ethical screen has prevented you or you had to recuse yourself? Like, for instance, your Bill C-27, have you had to recuse yourself?
The conflict of interest screen has been in place, I think, for about a year and a half. As soon as it got done, it was in place. And I don't know the total number of times, but I can remember at least 2 times that I've been taken out of meetings because of that conflict of interest screen, I believe. Of course, I don't know what happened in those meetings, so I can't answer your second question because, by definition, I'm taken out of the meeting so that I don't know what's happening in the meeting.
That says ministers should register when that happens. Mr. LeBlanc, for instance, has done it for a July 2016 meeting. Can you tell us what the meetings concern?
I don't know about that provision in the Act. If there is, in fact, a requirement that we say when we were taken out, then of course we'll comply with that. I have been, and can report to you today that I've been taken out of meetings. I can also tell you that I don't know what the issues were discussed in those meetings because I was taken out. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.